The morning I found out, I was standing at the kitchen counter cutting coupons. That's the kind of woman I am, 67 years old. Retired from the post office after 31 years, and I still cut coupons on Saturday mornings with my reading glasses sliding down my nose and the radio playing low in the background. My husband Raymond used to tease me about it, said I'd be cutting coupons at 95, hunched over a kitchen table somewhere with scissors in one hand and a magnifying glass in the other. I used to laugh at that. I don't think about it the same way anymore. Raymond passed 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 63 days from diagnosis to the end. I won't go into all of that here because I still can't get through it without my chest tightening up. But what I will say is that losing him changed the way I thought about time, about what I was doing with mine, about who I was spending it on. After he was gone, I threw myself into my children. My son, my daughter, my grandchildren. I told myself that's what Raymond would have wanted. Keep the family together, be the center of things, be useful. What I didn't understand then, and I understand now with painful clarity, is that there's a difference between being the center of your family and being the engine of it. One means you're loved, the other means you're useful until you're not. The trip was my idea. I want to be clear about that, because everything that followed made me second-guess it, made me wonder if I had overstepped or overreached or somehow brought it all on myself. But no, the trip was my idea, my money, my planning, my love offered with both hands. It started 2 Thanksgivings ago when my son, I'll call him my son because that's what he is to me, whatever else he became in all of this, mentioned offhand that he and his wife had always wanted to take the kids to the Smoky Mountains. Just a passing comment over sweet potato pie. I tucked it away. I'd been saving money since Raymond died. Not a fortune. I'm not a rich woman. But I'd been putting back $200 a month into a separate account, what I called my someday account. And by the time that Thanksgiving came around, I had just over $14,000 sitting in it. I'd been vague in my own mind about what someday meant. A cruise, maybe. New floors in the house. Something. But listening to my son talk about the mountains, watching my grandchildren, 7 and 9 years old, push pie around their plates and argue about something I can't even remember now, I thought, this is it. This is what the money is for. Not floors. Not a cruise. This? I spent 3 months planning it. I'm not exaggerating. 3 months. I researched cabin rentals in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, read reviews, cross-referenced locations with distance from Dollywood and hiking trails and the aquarium the kids had mentioned wanting to see. I found a place. 5 bedrooms, 2 stories, a wraparound porch with rocking chairs, a hot tub on the back deck, a stone fireplace in the great room. It slept 12. I thought maybe we'd invite my daughter and her boyfriend, make it a real family reunion kind of thing. I booked it under my name. I paid the full deposit, 30%, which came to just over $2,000, with my debit card. The remaining balance would be due 30 days before check-in. I told my son about it in February, on his birthday. I'd wrapped up a little card with a picture I'd printed of the cabin, the mountains behind it, snow still on the peaks. I watched his face when he opened it. He hugged me. He actually hugged me and said, "Mama, you didn't have to do this." I said, "I know I didn't have to. That's why I wanted to." His wife smiled. It was a thin smile, but I noted it and let it go. I'd always had a complicated relationship with my daughter-in-law. She's not a warm person. That's not a criticism, just an observation. Some people run warm, some people run cool. She runs cool. I'd made peace with that years ago. Or I thought I had. I left that birthday dinner feeling like I'd done something real. Something lasting. I drove home with the windows cracked, even though it was February and cold, just because I wanted to feel the air. The first sign that something was wrong came in April. I'd started a group chat to coordinate the trip. My son, my daughter-in-law, my daughter, her boyfriend, and me. I'd share links to restaurants, ask about dietary restrictions, plan out which days we'd do which activities. My daughter was enthusiastic. She'd respond with exclamation points and heart emojis and questions about the hiking trails. My daughter-in-law never responded, not once, not to a single message in that group chat. I told myself she was busy. She works in hospital administration, long hours, a lot of stress. I made excuses for her the way I'd been making excuses for years. But there was something that had started to sit wrong in my stomach, a low-grade unease that I couldn't quite name. In May, my son called me on a Tuesday night, not a Sunday. We always talked Sundays. Tuesday night, around 8:30, which was unusual enough that I picked up before the second ring. He said he needed to talk to me about the trip. I said okay. I sat down. He said that his wife had been thinking about it, and she felt like a big group vacation might be too stressful for the kids, that they did better with smaller settings, that maybe it would be better if it was just their immediate family, him, her, and the grandchildren. I sat there for a moment holding the phone. I said, "Just the four of you?" He said yes. I said, "At the cabin I booked." He said, "Well, we'd figure out the details." "The details," I said. I heard my own voice go very flat. "The details, like whether or not I'm invited to the trip I planned and paid for." He got quiet. Then he said, "And I will remember this for the rest of my life." He said, "Mama, don't make this personal. Don't make this personal. I am 67 years old. My husband is buried in a cemetery 20 minutes from my house. I spent 3 months planning a trip for this family. I paid the deposit out of money. I saved $200 at a time. And my son told me not to make it personal. I said, I need to think." And I hung up. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the bed Raymond and I shared for 34 years, and I stared at the ceiling and I thought about all the ways I might have misunderstood. Maybe I'd heard it wrong. Maybe he meant something different. I ran the conversation through my head 17 times at least, looking for the version where it made sense, where it came out okay. There wasn't one. Around 3 in the morning, I got up and made chamomile tea and sat at the kitchen table and let myself feel it fully for the first time. The embarrassment of it, the specific shame of being excluded from something you created, the loneliness that I'd been trying not to name for 4 years, that quiet, particular loneliness of being the one who gives and never thinks to ask what she's getting back. I thought about Raymond. He would have been furious. He was a quiet man, but there was bedrock under that quiet, and he would not have stood for this. He would have driven over to that house and had a conversation I probably would have had to talk him down from. But Raymond wasn't here, and I was the one sitting at the kitchen table at 3 in the morning in a house that echoed. I want to be honest about the next part, because I think it's important. Before I got to the place where I knew what I was going to do, I went through all the other places first. I thought about calling my son back and apologizing. For what, I couldn't have said. But I thought about it. I thought about saying whatever I needed to say to smooth it over, to keep the peace, to stay in my grandchildren's lives without disruption. I have been smoothing things over my entire life. It is the thing I am best at. And also, I've come to understand, the thing that has cost me the most. I thought about calling my daughter-in-law directly, asking her what I'd done, if there was something I could fix. But I knew in the way you know things you've been pretending not to know, that there was nothing to fix. I hadn't done anything. I existed. I was my son's mother. That was the problem, and there was no apology in the world that would change it. What I settled on, finally, sitting at that table as the sky started going grey outside the window, was this. I was not going to beg. I was 67 years old, and I was not going to beg. The next morning, I called my friend Cynthia. Cynthia and I had been friends since we were both young mothers pushing strollers around the same park in 1989. She's 71 now, retired teacher, sharper than anyone I know, and she does not soften things for you, which is exactly what I needed. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which from Cynthia is a rare gift. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What are you going to do about the cabin?" I said I wasn't sure yet. She said, "Well, I know what I'd do." I asked her what. She said, "I'd take myself a trip." I laughed for the first time in about 16 hours. It wasn't a big laugh, but it was real, and it cracked something open that I needed cracked. I called a rental company that afternoon. The full balance was due in 30 days, and I was the name on the reservation. Everything, the booking, the deposit, the linked payment account, was in my name. I explained to the woman on the phone that I needed to modify the reservation. I asked about my options. She walked me through them. I could cancel with a partial refund. I'd lose about half the deposit. Or I could keep the reservation and simply change the guest list. The cabin stayed booked. The name on the file stayed the same. Who showed up to use it was entirely up to me. I said I'd keep the reservation, then I called Cynthia back. I told her to clear the last week of July. She said, "Oh, we're doing this." I said, "We're doing this." Then I called my friend Wanda, who I've known since my post office days, and who has been trying to get me to take a trip with her for 3 years. And I called my neighbor Dolores, who is 74, and recently widowed, and who cried a little when I invited her, which made me cry a little too, though. I didn't tell her that. 4 women, 5 bedrooms, a wrap-around porch with rocking chairs and a hot tub and a stone fireplace, and the Smoky Mountains turning gold in the evening light. I called my son 2 days later. I want to be clear, I did not call him to argue. I did not call him to argue. I did not call him to guilt him or to threaten him or to extract an apology. I called him because he is my son, and I was not going to let him hear about any of this second-hand. I told him I'd been thinking about what he said. I told him I understood that he and his wife wanted to do something on their own terms, and I wasn't going to fight that. I told him the cabin reservation was staying in my name, and that I would be using it for the week of July 21st with some friends. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Mama, I thought," and stopped. I said, "You thought what?" He said they'd assumed they would work out the booking details. He said his wife had been looking at the cabin's availability for that same week. I said, "The cabin is booked under my name and paid for with my money. I've made other plans for it." He said, "So you're punishing us?" I thought about that word. Punishing. I turned it over. I said, "I'm going on vacation. That's all I'm doing." He brought up the deposit. He asked if he could have back what he'd contributed toward it, which was nothing, because he had contributed nothing, not $1, not a thank you card. I had paid every cent and done every bit of the planning, and he sat there on the phone asking about the deposit. I said, "There's nothing to give back. You didn't pay anything." Another long silence. Then he said his wife had really been looking forward to it. I let that sit there between us on the phone. His wife, who had never responded to a single message in the group chat. His wife, who had decided, at some point and for reasons she never bothered to explain to me directly, that I was not welcome on a trip I had created for this family. His wife had been looking forward to it. I said, "I'm sorry to hear that. I hope you will find something nice for the summer." And I hung up. I won't pretend the weeks between that phone call and the trip were easy. They weren't. I have a particular talent for second-guessing myself in the middle of the night, and I used it thoroughly. I thought about my grandchildren. That was the hardest part. Not my son, not my daughter-in-law, my grandchildren who had nothing to do with any of this and who I pictured confused about why they weren't seeing me. My daughter called after she heard what had happened. She was angry in a way I had to talk her down from, which felt strange, being the one to calm somebody else's anger about my own situation. But she said something that stayed with me. She said, "Mama, you have spent 40 years making yourself small so everybody else could feel big. You don't have to do that anymore." I thought about that for a long time. I had spent 40 years making myself small. I had bitten my tongue at holidays and swallowed my hurt and driven across town when I was tired and said yes when I meant no, and acted grateful for the scraps of my son's attention that made it past his wife's coolness and landed on my side of the fence. I had told myself that was what good mothers did. I had told myself that was love. But somewhere between the birthday card with the mountain picture and the Tuesday night phone call, I had started to understand that there is a kind of love that looks like love from the outside, but is really just fear. Fear of being left out. Fear of being left out. Fear of becoming irrelevant, invisible, unnecessary. And I had been practicing that fear for years and calling it devotion. What I had planned for this family was beautiful. I knew it was beautiful, and the fact that it had been turned into something else, something I had to reclaim, something I had to defend, did not make it less beautiful. It just made it mine again. We left for Gatlinburg on a Sunday morning in July. Cynthia drove the first stretch and Wanda controlled the music, and Dolores brought a cooler full of snacks that lasted us the entire drive. And then some. We stopped at a diner outside of Knoxville and ordered too much food and sat there for 2 hours just talking, the way women talk when they've known each other long enough to skip all the preamble and go straight to the good stuff. When we pulled up to the cabin, I sat in the car for a moment before I got out. It was exactly what the pictures had shown. The porch with the rocking chairs, the mountain ridgeline behind it, going blue in the late afternoon. A wind chime somewhere making its small sound. I'd imagined this moment so many times, imagined who would be getting out of the car with me. It was different than what I'd imagined. It was smaller in some ways and larger in others. I got out of the car. The air smelled like pine and summer and something else I can't quite name. That particular smell of mountains that you can't replicate anywhere else. That cleanness that makes your lungs feel younger. Dolores came and stood beside me. She put her hand through my arm the way old friends do, and we looked at it together. She said, "Oh, Lorraine. That's my name, Lorraine." And the way she said it, soft and full, like it contained everything she didn't need to say out loud. I felt it go all the way through me. We spent 5 days in those mountains. We sat on the porch every morning with our coffee and watched the mist lift off the ridges. We drove into Gatlinburg and ate taffy and walked through the little shops, and Cynthia bought herself a ridiculous hat that she wore for the rest of the trip. We found a waterfall about a mile in on a trail that was just at the edge of what Dolores's knees could manage, and when we got there and stood in the spray, Wanda said a prayer out loud, just a few sentences, thanking God for the water and the mountains and the company, and all 4 of us stood there a little quieter than we'd been before. One evening we sat out on the back deck with the hot tub bubbling and the fireflies starting up in the trees, and Dolores told us about her husband. Not the sad parts, the funny parts, the stories she hadn't told in a while because there was no one around who'd known him, and we laughed until we were wiping our eyes. That kind of laughter. The kind that comes from somewhere real. I did not think about my son every hour. That surprised me. I thought I would, but I didn't. I thought about Raymond sometimes, the way I always do. But even those thoughts were softer there, gentler, like the mountains had taken some of the sharpness off of them. On the last night, I sat alone on the porch after the others had gone to bed. The sky was clear and enormous, the kind of sky you forget is possible when you've been living too close to town. I sat in one of the rocking chairs and looked at it for a long time. I didn't feel angry. I want to be honest about that, because the easy version of this story is that I got my revenge, and it felt good, and that was the end. But it wasn't anger I felt sitting on that porch. It was something quieter than that, something more like settling, like a house after the foundation has finally stopped shifting. I thought about the woman who had planned this trip, the woman who had put $200 a month into an account for years because she loved her family and wanted to do something beautiful for them. That woman had not been wrong to love them. She had not been foolish to try. She had just been directing it all at people who had stopped looking in her direction, and she hadn't noticed, or hadn't let herself notice, because noticing would have hurt too much. I noticed now, and what I knew sitting there under that sky was that I still had so much of it left in me. That love wasn't the problem. It had never been the problem. The question was just where I was going to put it from here on out. I thought about Cynthia saying we should do this every year. I thought about Dolores's face at the waterfall. I thought about Wanda's prayer and the way all four of us had gone quiet in the spray. I thought, here. I'm going to put it here. My son and I have talked since then. It has been careful and difficult, and I think it will probably remain that way for a long time, maybe always. I am not a woman who believes you can pretend things didn't happen. We both know what happened. We're both just figuring out what to do with that knowledge. He has not apologized. Not really. He said he was sorry I was hurt, which is not the same thing. His wife has not reached out to me at all, which I've decided to simply accept as information about who she is and adjust accordingly. My grandchildren came for a weekend in September. We baked cookies and watched a movie, and I let the 7-year-old paint my fingernails a color she chose herself, which turned out to be a very aggressive orange, and I wore it for 2 weeks. I am not going to let what happened take them from me. That's the line I've drawn for myself. Everything else I'm taking one day at a time. What I know is this: I am 67 years old. I have a porch of my own with a chair I like, and a garden that needs tending in the spring, and friends who will answer the phone at 3 in the morning, and mountains, apparently, that have my name on them. I am not small. I was never meant to be small. I am just now, this late and this slowly, beginning to understand that. I've been thinking about something Cynthia said to me, not on that first phone call when I told her everything, but later, on the porch of the cabin on our 3rd night there. She said, "You know what the saddest part of all this is? You would have kept giving. If they'd let you come, you would have kept giving and never once asked yourself why it always had to be you." She was right. And that's the part I've had to sit with the longest. There is a kind of person. And I think a lot of women who are watching this know exactly who I'm talking about, because I think a lot of us were raised to be her, who measures her worth by how much she can do for other people, who wakes up in the morning and the first thought is not, what do I need today, but what does everyone else need, and am I already behind? I was that person for 40 years. I was good at it. I kept the family fed, and the holidays running, and the peace intact, and I told myself that was enough. That was the point. That was love. What I understand now is that there's a version of giving that comes from wholeness, from genuine care offered freely, and there's another version that comes from fear. Fear of being forgotten, fear of being left out, fear that if you stop making yourself useful, people will stop seeing you at all. I had been practicing that second kind for so long that I'd confused it for virtue. The phone call from my son didn't break something in me. I want to be honest about that. What it did was finally make visible something that had been breaking slowly for years. Every time I'd bitten my tongue, every holiday where I'd made myself smaller so his wife could feel more comfortable, every Sunday call where I'd listened more than I'd spoken, those things had been accumulating in a ledger I hadn't let myself read. When I changed the guest list on that cabin, when I called Cynthia and Wanda and Dolores and said, "Come with me," I wasn't punishing anyone. I know my son believes I was, but what I was actually doing, maybe for the first time in a very long time, was choosing myself not out of spite but out of self-respect. There is a difference. Spite burns. Self-respect is quieter than that. It just holds the line. What I know about how our choices work. in this life, in our relationships, in our families, is that they compound. The small decisions we make every day about who we are and how we allow ourselves to be treated, they add up. My son made a series of small decisions that added up to a phone call on a Tuesday night that changed things between us permanently. I made a series of small decisions, mostly decisions to stay quiet and absorb and forgive. That added up to a woman sitting alone at 3 in the morning, wondering when she had become a burden in the family she'd built. Neither of us gets to undo those things. What we get to do is decide what comes next. I am not a bitter woman. I've worked hard not to become one. But I am a different woman than I was before that phone call, and I think that's the honest ending to this story. I went to those mountains with 3 friends who love me, and I came home understanding something I should have understood decades ago, that the love you give yourself is not selfish. It is, in fact, the only kind of love that no one can take from you. Wanda, Cynthia, Dolores, they saw me, fully, clearly, without me having to perform anything or justify anything, or make myself smaller first. That's what I'd been hungry for. That's what I'd been substituting with grand gestures and vacation plans and $200 a month into a jar. I'm 67. The mountains are still there. And so, it turns out, am I.